The telegram arrived at the office of the Fort Smith, Arkansas newspaper on a Tuesday morning in June of 1878, and when Lillian Sinclair read its contents, she asked 17 questions in the span of 3 minutes, causing her editor to slam his fist on his desk and tell her for the 100th time that a woman had no business writing anything more than social columns and recipes. Lillian stood in the cramped newspaper office, her fingers still clutching the telegram that spoke of a robbery along the cattle trails leading into Indian Territory. She had worked at the Fort Smith Gazette for 2 years, ever since her father died and left her with nothing but debts and a small room above the general store. At 22 years old, she had hoped to prove herself as a real journalist, but every story she pitched was met with the same dismissive wave of Editor Thornton's meaty hand. Why would cattle rustlers target that particular ranch? What were they carrying that made it worth the risk? How many men were involved? Were there witnesses? Did they leave any trail? What direction did they head? Is there a connection to the previous robberies last month? The questions tumbled from her lips before she could stop them, her mind already piecing together patterns and possibilities. "Enough," Thornton roared, his face reddening. "This is exactly why you will never be a real reporter, Miss Sinclair. You ask too many damn questions. You think too much. It is unbecoming in a woman, and it is certainly not what our readers want. Stick to the church social this Sunday and leave the real news to the men." Lillian felt the familiar burn of frustration in her chest, but she kept her expression composed. She had learned that showing emotion only made men like Thornton more convinced of her unsuitability. Instead, she simply nodded and returned to her small desk in the corner, where she was supposed to be writing about Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning apple pie recipe. But she could not stop thinking about the telegram. 3 robberies in as many weeks, all targeting ranchers bringing cattle through the territory. There was a pattern here. She was certain of it. If only someone would listen. That evening, Lillian stood at the window of her small room, watching the sun set over the Arkansas River. Fort Smith sat at the edge of civilization, a bustling town where lawmen, outlaws, traders, and dreamers all mixed together. Judge Isaac Parker's courthouse dominated the town, and his gallows had earned Fort Smith the nickname Hell on the Border. It was a place where questions needed to be asked, where truth needed to be uncovered, but no one wanted to hear those questions from her. She was still standing there when she heard the commotion in the street below. Horses, lots of them, and the sound of men calling out to each other. Lillian leaned closer to the window and saw a group of cowboys riding into town, their horses dusty from hard travel. They were moving cattle, she realized, a small herd being driven toward the stockyards at the edge of town. One rider caught her attention. He sat tall in the saddle, his movements fluid and confident. Even from a distance, she could see the authority in the way he carried himself. When he removed his hat to wipe his brow, she glimpsed dark hair and a strong profile. Something about him made her curious, though she could not say exactly what. The next morning, Lillian made her way to the stockyards. She told herself she was simply gathering information, following her instincts as any good reporter would. The fact that Thornton would have apoplexy if he knew she was investigating on her own made it slightly sweeter. The stockyard smelled of cattle and hay, and the morning air was already thick with heat. Lillian picked her way carefully through the mud, her notebook tucked under her arm. She had learned to dress practically for her excursions, wearing a simple brown skirt and white blouse that would not show every speck of dirt. "You lost, madam." The voice came from behind her, and Lillian turned to find herself facing the cowboy from the previous evening. Up close, he was even more striking than she had realized. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and lean strength evident in his frame. His eyes were a startling green, and they studied her with open curiosity rather than the dismissive irritation she usually encountered. "No, I am not lost," she said, lifting her chin. "I am looking for information about the recent cattle robberies in the territory." His expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "Are you with the law?" "No, I am a reporter for the Fort Smith Gazette." She did not mention that her official duties were limited to social announcements. "Can you tell me about the robbery that occurred 3 days ago near the Red River crossing?" To her surprise, he did not immediately brush her off or tell her to go home where she belonged. Instead, he seemed to consider her question carefully. "That was my herd that got hit," he said finally. "Lost 20 head of prime cattle. Would have been more if my men and I had not been ready for trouble." Lillian's pulse quickened with the thrill of a real story. Her hand went to her pocket, pulling out the small pencil she always carried. "You were expecting trouble. Why? Had there been warnings? What made you suspicious? How many men attacked? Did you recognize any of them? What time did it happen? Did they seem professional or opportunistic?" The cowboy's serious expression suddenly broke into a genuine smile, and Lillian felt her breath catch slightly. When he smiled like that, he was devastatingly handsome. "That is a lot of questions, madam." "I am sorry," she said automatically, the familiar shame washing over her. "People always tell me I ask too many questions." "Nothing to apologize for," he said, and his tone was warm without a trace of mockery. "I like a curious mind, shows intelligence. Most people do not ask enough questions if you want my opinion." He extended his hand. "Vincent Zeller." "My friends call me Vince." She shook his hand, surprised by the gesture. Most men in Fort Smith would not have offered to shake hands with a woman in such a direct manner. His grip was firm but careful, calloused from years of work. "Lillian Sinclair. Most people call me a nuisance." Vincent laughed, a rich sound that made something warm bloom in her chest. "Well, Miss Sinclair, I am happy to answer your questions if you have the time. Been wanting to talk to someone about these robberies anyway. The law does not seem too interested in helping us cattle ranchers." "Judge Parker has his hands full with murders and horse thieves," Lillian said. "Property crimes are low priority unless someone gets killed." "Smart observation," Vincent said, his green eyes showing approval. "You know this town well." "I have lived here all my life," she said. "My father worked for the railroad before he passed. I learned to pay attention to things." Vincent gestured toward a small office at the edge of the stockyards. "Come on. I will buy you a coffee and tell you everything I know. Fair warning, though, it is going to lead to more questions than answers." As they walked together through the mud and morning sun, Lillian felt something shift inside her. This man did not look at her like she was a pest or an oddity. He looked at her like her questions mattered, like her curiosity was something valuable rather than shameful. It was such a foreign feeling that she almost did not trust it. The office was small but clean, with a pot of strong coffee on a cast iron stove. Vincent poured them both cups and settled into a chair across from her. Through the window, she could see his men working with the cattle, sorting and counting. "The first robbery happened 3 weeks ago," Vincent began. "A rancher named Thomas Crawford was bringing a herd up from Texas. Got hit about 20 miles south of here, just inside the territory. Lost 50 head and one of his drovers got shot in the arm. Crawford said there were 6 men, all masked, and they knew exactly what they were doing." Lillian scribbled notes quickly. "Was it night or day?" "Just before dawn. That seems to be their preferred time." Vincent sipped his coffee. "The second robbery was 2 weeks ago. Different rancher, similar circumstances. Dawn raid, masked men, clean operation. That time they got away with 30 head. "And yours was the third," Lillian said, her mind already working through the information. "You said you were ready for them." What made you prepare? Vincent's expression grew serious. I have been moving cattle through this territory for 8 years. I know the land, I know the risks, and I know when something feels wrong. Word travels among the ranchers. When I heard about the pattern, I made sure my men were armed and alert. We set watches through the night. That is why they only got 20 head from you, Lillian said, understanding dawning. You fought back. We did. And I got a good look at one of them. His mask slipped during the fight. Vincent leaned forward, his voice dropping. I recognized him, Miss Sinclair. He works at the stockyards here in Fort Smith. Man named Dutch Kerrigan. Lillian's pencil paused on her notebook. You recognized one of the thieves and you have not told the law. I told Marshal Reeves 2 days ago, Vincent said, frustration evident in his voice. He said without more proof he cannot do anything. Kerrigan has an alibi, says he was in town during all 3 robberies, has witnesses willing to swear to it. But you know what you saw, Lillian said. I do. But my word alone is not enough, apparently. Vincent ran a hand through his hair. That is why I am still in Fort Smith, instead of heading back to my ranch in Texas. I want to figure out who else is involved. There is no way Kerrigan is running this alone. Someone here in town is organizing these robberies, and I aim to find out who. Lillian felt excitement building in her chest. This was a real story, the kind she had been dreaming of writing. What if we worked together? The words came out before she fully thought them through. You need information and I need a story. I can move through town without drawing suspicion. I can ask questions, listen to gossip, piece things together. And you have the knowledge of the cattle business and the territory. Vincent studied her for a long moment, and Lillian held her breath, waiting for him to dismiss her offer as foolish. Instead, he slowly nodded. That might work, but I need to know you understand the risks. These men have already shown they are willing to shoot anyone who gets in their way. If they figure out we are investigating them, we could both end up hurt or worse. I understand the risks, Lillian said firmly, and I am willing to take them. I am tired of writing about church socials and pie recipes. This is the kind of work I am meant to do, I can feel it. A smile tugged at Vincent's mouth. How old are you, if you do not mind me asking? 22. And you? 26. Been ranching since I was 18 when my father decided to try his luck at cattle driving and I came along. He extended his hand again. All right, Miss Sinclair. We have ourselves a partnership. She shook his hand, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers. Call me Lillian. Only if you call me Vince. Over the next week, Lillian and Vince became a team. They met each morning at a small diner near the edge of town, where they could talk without drawing attention. Lillian had told editor Thornton she was working on a series of articles about the cattle industry in Fort Smith, which was technically true even if she left out the part about investigating criminal activity. He had rolled his eyes but approved it, probably assuming she would produce something bland and inoffensive. Instead, Lillian threw herself into real investigative work. She spent her days talking to people around town, asking casual questions about the stockyards, about Dutch Kerrigan, about who had been spending more money than usual lately. She visited saloons and general stores, listened to conversations, and took note of everything. The more time she spent with Vince, the more she found herself drawn to him. He treated her like an equal partner, listening to her theories and observations with genuine interest. When she got excited about a new lead and started rapid-firing questions, he never told her to slow down or be quiet. Instead, he would lean back, smile that devastating smile of his, and answer every single question thoughtfully. You really do not mind all my questions? She asked him one morning, after she had spent 10 minutes peppering him with inquiries about cattle prices and shipping routes. "I told you I like your curious mind," he said, his green eyes warm. "You think differently than most people. You see connections others miss. It is impressive." Lillian felt heat rise to her cheeks. She was not used to compliments, especially not from men who looked like Vince. "Well, your patience is impressive. Most people want to throttle me after 5 minutes. Then most people are fools," Vince said simply. "Your questions show you care about getting to the truth. That is rare." Their investigation was starting to bear fruit. Lillian had discovered that Dutch Kerrigan had been seen drinking with a man named Robert Fallon, who worked as a clerk in the stockyard offices. Fallon had access to shipping schedules and would know exactly when valuable herds were moving through the territory. She had also learned that Kerrigan had a brother who ran a small ranch about 30 miles south, right along the main cattle trail. "That ranch could be where they are holding the stolen cattle," Vince said when Lillian shared her findings. They were sitting on a bench outside the general store, speaking quietly. The evening was warm, and the streets were busy with people finishing their daily business. They steal the cattle, drive them to the brothers' ranch, rebrand them, and then sell them through legitimate channels. "It is a smart operation. We need proof," Lillian said. "Something concrete we can take to Marshal Reeves." "I know," Vince said. "I have been thinking about that. If I could get out to that ranch, maybe I could spot some of my cattle. I branded mine with a distinctive mark, and brands are hard to fully hide even with rebranding." "When would you go?" Lillian asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Tomorrow, probably. I will take a couple of my men with me." He looked at her seriously. "You should stay in town where it is safe." Lillian bristled. "I am part of this investigation too. I should be there." "Lillian, if things go wrong, it could get dangerous. These men are armed and they are not going to be happy about being discovered." "I can handle myself," she insisted. "And I need to see this through. This is my story, Vince. I cannot write it properly if I am not there." Vince studied her face for a moment, and she could see him weighing his options. Finally, he sighed. "You are as stubborn as you are smart, you know that." "I have been told that before," she said, unable to keep a small smile from her face. "All right. But you stay back with the horses if trouble starts. I need your word on that." "You have it." They left before dawn the next morning. Vince had insisted they travel light and quiet, just the two of them rather than bringing his whole crew. He had good horses for them both, strong animals that could cover ground quickly if needed. Lillian had never ridden so far before, but she refused to show any weakness. The journey south took them through rolling hills and scattered woods. The summer sun beat down on them as they rode, and Lillian was grateful for the wide-brimmed hat Vince had loaned her. They stopped once at a creek to water the horses and rest briefly, and Lillian found herself watching the way Vince moved, the easy confidence he had in the saddle, the way his hands were gentle but firm with his horse. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, catching her gaze. "Just observing," she said, feeling caught. "A good reporter notices details. Is that what you are doing, reporting?" There was something in his tone, a warmth that made her pulse quicken. "Always," she said, but her voice came out softer than she intended. They reached the area near the Kerrigan brothers' ranch in the late afternoon. Vince found a spot on a ridge that overlooked the property, sheltered by trees. From there, they could see the ranch below, a modest collection of buildings and corrals. Even from a distance, Lillian could see cattle in the pens, far more than a small operation like this should have. Vince pulled a spyglass from his saddlebag and studied the scene below. After several minutes, his body tensed. "That is them," he said quietly. "I can see my brand on at least 6 head down there. They did try to rebrand them, but I can still make out my mark underneath." "That is the proof we need," Lillian said excitedly. "It is," Vince agreed. Now we just need to get back to Fort Smith and bring the law back with us." They were turning their horses to leave when Lillian heard the distinctive sound of a gun being cocked. Both of them froze. "I would not move if I was you," a rough voice said from behind them. Lillian's heart hammered against her ribs as she slowly turned to see 3 men on horseback emerging from the trees. She recognized Dutch Kerrigan immediately from Vince's description. The other 2 were strangers, but they all had guns drawn and pointed directly at Vince and her. "Well now," Kerrigan said, a nasty smile spreading across his face. "Looks like we got ourselves some spies. I knew someone was poking around asking questions about me. Should have figured it was you, Zeller. You have been hanging around town too long." "Let her go," Vince said, his voice steady despite the guns trained on them. "She has nothing to do with this. That little newspaper girl, oh, I know all about her, been asking questions all over town, getting real nosy." Kerrigan shook his head. "Can't let either of you go now. You have seen too much." Lillian felt ice in her veins, but her mind was racing. They were in trouble, real trouble. She glanced at Vince and saw him carefully calculating their options. His hand was nowhere near his gun, wise given the situation, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Marshal Reeves knows where we are," Lillian said, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "If we do not return, he will come looking. Killing us will only make things worse for you." "Nice try, girl, but I know that is not true," Kerrigan said. "You 2 have been playing detective all on your own. Nobody knows you are out here." He gestured with his gun. "Get off those horses, slowly." They dismounted, and immediately the 3 men closed in around them. Kerrigan pulled rope from his saddle. "We are going to take you down to the ranch. Let my brother figure out what to do with you. He is better at planning than I am." As Kerrigan moved to tie Vince's hands, everything happened at once. Vince suddenly lunged forward, slamming his shoulder into Kerrigan and knocking him backward. "Run!" he shouted to Lillian, but Lillian did not run. She could not leave Vince. Instead, she grabbed a heavy branch from the ground and swung it hard at the nearest man, catching him across the shoulders. He yelled in surprise and pain, stumbling backward. Vince was grappling with Kerrigan, both men fighting for control of the gun. The 3rd man was trying to get a clear shot, but could not without risking hitting his partner. Lillian swung her branch again, this time at the man she had already hit, and he went down hard. A gunshot split the air, and Lillian's blood turned to ice. But then she saw Vince standing, breathing hard, and Kerrigan on the ground clutching his leg where blood was spreading across his pants. "Do not move." The shout came from behind them, and Lillian spun to see Marshal Bass Reeves riding into the clearing, his gun drawn, with several deputies behind him. Relief crashed over Lillian so powerfully that her knees nearly buckled. Marshal Reeves, one of the most famous lawmen in the territory, quickly took control of the situation. The deputies rounded up Kerrigan and his men, and Reeves himself approached Vince and Lillian. "You 2 all right?" the marshal asked, his dark eyes sharp and assessing. "How did you find us?" Vince asked, still breathing hard from the fight. "We have been watching Kerrigan for weeks," Reeves explained. "When you came to me with that identification, it confirmed our suspicions. We have been tracking his movements, and when he and his men rode out here in a hurry this afternoon, we followed. Good thing we did." "He was right about one thing," Lillian said, her voice shaking slightly now that the danger had passed. "We should have told someone where we were going." "That you should have," Reeves agreed, but his tone was not unkind. "But you did good work uncovering this operation. Between what we have been gathering and the evidence you found, we should be able to shut down this whole rustling ring." As the deputies hauled the 3 men away, Vince turned to Lillian. "You did not run," he said quietly. "I could not leave you. Something intense passed between them in that moment, a connection that went beyond their partnership in investigation. Vince reached out and gently touched her cheek. "You could have been killed." "So could you," she said, her hand coming up to cover his. "I was so scared when that gun went off." "Lillian," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I need to tell you something. These past few weeks, working with you, getting to know you, it has been the best time of my life. Your questions, your curiosity, your brilliant mind, everything about you fascinates me. I know we have only known each other a short time, but I cannot stop thinking about you." Lillian felt her heart soar. "I feel the same way. When you smile at my questions instead of telling me to be quiet, when you actually listen to what I have to say, it makes me feel seen in a way I never have before." "I more than see you," Vince said, stepping closer. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," she breathed. His lips met hers softly at first, tentative and questioning. But then the kiss deepened, and Lillian felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. His arms came around her, strong and protective, and she melted into him. All the fear and danger of the past hour dissolving into this perfect moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vince rested his forehead against hers. "Come back to Texas with me," he said. "I know it is fast. I know we should probably take more time, but I do not want to be apart from you. I want to hear your questions every day for the rest of my life." "I want that too," Lillian said. "But what about my work? I have finally found a real story, something meaningful. I cannot just abandon journalism." "Then do not," Vince said simply. "Write your story, and then write more stories. My ranch is near Austin. There are newspapers there, opportunities for a talented reporter. We will figure it out together. I promise I will never ask you to give up your curious mind. It is one of the things I love most about you." "You love me?" Lillian asked, hardly daring to believe it. "I do," Vince said. "I know it is soon, but I am certain. I love everything about you, Lillian Sinclair." "I love you too," she said, the words feeling right and true. "Yes, I will come to Texas with you. I will go anywhere with you." They kissed again, and in that moment Lillian felt like all her questions had finally led her to the answer she had been seeking her whole life. The ride back to Fort Smith was entirely different from the tense journey out. Despite their exhaustion and the fading adrenaline from the confrontation, Lillian felt lighter than she had in years. Vince rode close beside her, and every time their eyes met, she felt that same electric connection. Marshal Reeves and his deputies rode ahead with the prisoners, leaving Vince and Lillian to follow at their own pace. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, and the summer air had finally cooled to something pleasant. "Tell me about your ranch," Lillian said. "I want to know everything." Vince smiled at her, that warm expression that made her heart skip. "It is about 3,000 acres, good grazing land near the Colorado River. I built the house myself 5 years ago. It is not fancy, but it is solid. 2 bedrooms, a real kitchen, a porch that looks out over the hills. I always thought it felt too empty, but now I think I know why. It was waiting for you." "That is very romantic," Lillian said, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "I can be romantic when properly motivated," Vince said with a grin. "And you, Miss Sinclair, are extremely motivating. What about your family? Do you have siblings? Will they think I am crazy for running off with you so quickly?" The questions flowed naturally, as they always did with her. "My parents passed away 3 years ago, both of them within a month of each other. It was influenza. I have one older sister, Margaret, but she is married and lives in San Antonio. She will love you, I am sure of it. Anyone who can keep up with me and my stubbornness will earn her immediate respect." He paused. "What about your family?" "Just me," Lillian said. "My mother died when I was 10. My father passed 2 years ago, no siblings. It has been lonely, if I am honest. I threw myself into my work because I did not have much else. You have me now, Vince said softly, and I promise you will never be lonely again. They arrived in Fort Smith well after dark. The streets were quiet except for the usual noise from the saloons. Marshal Reeves had already taken the prisoners to the jail, and word was spreading quickly about the captured rustlers. Vince insisted on walking Lillian back to her room above the general store, leading both horses behind them. When they reached her door, Lillian found herself reluctant to say goodnight. "When will I see you again?" "Tomorrow morning, same as always," Vince said. "I am not going anywhere without you, remember? Besides, we have to tell Editor Thornton about your story. I want to see his face when you hand him the best piece of journalism Fort Smith has seen in years." Lillian laughed. "He is going to have apoplexy." "Good," Vince said. He cupped her face gently in his hands. "You deserve to have people recognize your talent. And if that old fool cannot see it, we will find someone who can." He kissed her goodnight, a soft, lingering kiss that made promises of all the tomorrows to come. When Lillian finally climbed the stairs to her small room, she felt like she was floating. The next morning, Lillian walked into the Fort Smith Gazette office with her head held high and pages of notes in her hand. Editor Thornton looked up from his desk with his usual expression of irritation. "Miss Sinclair, I trust you have that cattle industry piece ready for me." "I do," Lillian said, "but it is not exactly what you were expecting." She laid out the whole story for him. The pattern of robberies, her investigation with Vince, their discovery of the stolen cattle, and the confrontation that led to the arrests. She spoke clearly and confidently, no longer the timid woman who had accepted being relegated to social columns. Thornton's expression shifted from annoyance to shock to something that might have been grudging respect. "You did this. You uncovered a criminal operation." "I did. With Vincent Zeller's help, but yes, I did the investigative work. I asked the questions that needed to be asked, and I followed the evidence where it led." She placed her written article on his desk. "This is the story you are going to run on the front page. My name is going on it as the reporter. And then I am resigning." "Resigning," Thornton sputtered. "Now wait just a minute, I am moving to Texas," Lillian continued. "I am going to marry Vincent Zeller, and I am going to continue my journalism career there. But I wanted you to know that your constant dismissal of my abilities was wrong. I am a good reporter, and I always was. You were just too stubborn to see it." She turned and walked out of the office before he could respond, feeling victorious and free. Vince was waiting for her outside, leaning against the wall of the building with his arms crossed and a proud smile on his face. "How did it go?" he asked. "Perfectly," Lillian said, grinning. "I am officially unemployed." "Good," Vince said, pulling her close. "Because I have a proposition for you. And before you ask, yes, it involves marriage. I do not have a fancy ring yet, but I want to do this properly. Lillian Sinclair, will you marry me?" "Yes," Lillian said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married 2 weeks later by Judge Parker himself, who had taken an interest in the case and in the brave young woman who had helped solve it. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, held in the judge's chambers with Marshal Reeves and a few of Vince's men as witnesses. Lillian wore a new dress of pale blue, the first truly nice clothing she had owned in years, purchased with the generous payment Editor Thornton had given her for her story after it caused a sensation throughout Fort Smith and beyond. As Vince slipped a simple gold band onto her finger and promised to love and cherish her curious mind for all his days, Lillian felt tears of joy slip down her cheeks. She had spent so much of her life being told she was too much, too curious, too questioning. And now she had found a man who loved her not despite those qualities, but because of them. Their wedding night was spent at the Fort Smith Hotel, a luxury Lillian had never experienced. Vince was gentle and patient, and when she nervously asked if it was normal to have questions even about this, he had laughed and told her to ask away. They talked and loved through the night, and Lillian felt like she had finally found her home in his arms. The journey to Texas took them 5 days of steady travel. Vince had sold his cattle in Fort Smith at a good price, and they traveled with a wagon full of supplies for their new life together. The landscape changed gradually as they moved south and west, the hills giving way to wider plains and bigger skies. Lillian asked questions constantly during the journey. What kind of trees were those? How did Vince navigate without getting lost? What were the names of all the wildflowers they passed? What was that bird? Vince answered every question with patience and obvious delight in her curiosity. "I am never going to get bored with you, am I?" he said on the third day after she had spent 20 minutes quizzing him about cloud formations. "Probably not," Lillian admitted. "Is that going to be a problem?" "Not even a little bit," Vince said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "I told you I love your curious mind." When they finally reached the ranch, Lillian fell in love with it immediately. The house was exactly as Vince had described it, solid and welcoming, with that magnificent porch overlooking rolling hills dotted with cattle. The land stretched out in every direction, endless and beautiful under the vast Texas sky. "What do you think?" Vince asked, watching her face carefully. "I think it is perfect," Lillian said honestly. "I think this is exactly where I am supposed to be." They spent the next few weeks settling in and learning each other's rhythms. Vince taught Lillian how to ride properly, how to help with the ranch work, how to read the weather and the cattle. Lillian wrote letters to newspapers in Austin, introducing herself and her work, and was thrilled when the Austin Daily Statesman wrote back expressing interest in having her as a correspondent. "They want me to write about life on a working ranch," she told Vince excitedly, waving the letter. "They said readers back east are fascinated by stories about the real West, and they want authentic voices telling those stories." "That is wonderful," Vince said, picking her up and spinning her around. "You see, I told you we would figure it out." "You did," Lillian said, kissing him. "You always believed in me." "Always," he confirmed. Life on the ranch fell into a comfortable pattern. Lillian wrote her articles and helped Vince with the ranch work, discovering she enjoyed the physical labor and the connection to the land. Vince hired a few ranch hands to help with the cattle operation, good men who treated Lillian with respect and grew accustomed to her endless questions about ranching operations. One of those hands was a young man named Thomas, barely 18, who had shown up looking for work with nothing but the clothes on his back and a desperate need for a fresh start. Vince had hired him without hesitation, seeing something of his younger self in the boy's determination. Lillian took Thomas under her wing, teaching him to read and write better in the evenings after the work was done. "Why are you helping me?" Thomas asked one night, puzzled by her kindness. "Because everyone deserves a chance to improve themselves," Lillian said. "And because asking questions and seeking knowledge should not be a privilege, it should be available to everyone." Thomas proved to be a dedicated student and a hard worker. Within 6 months, he was Vince's most trusted hand, and Lillian felt proud of the role she had played in his growth. As their first year of marriage approached, Lillian realized she had not had her monthly courses in some time. She had been so busy with her writing and the ranch that she had barely noticed, but now the signs were unmistakable. She was pregnant. She told Vince one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, something that had become their favorite ritual. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hand. "You are pregnant," Vince said immediately, a huge smile spreading across his face. "How did you know?" Lillian asked, surprised. "I have noticed you have been tired lately and you have not been drinking coffee in the mornings," Vince said. "Plus, I have been around pregnant cattle enough to recognize the signs." He pulled her into his lap carefully. "I am so happy, Lillian, a baby, our baby." "You are not worried?" Lillian asked. "I am. I keep thinking of all the things that could go wrong, all the questions I do not have answers to." "It is natural to worry," Vince said, holding her close, "but we are going to get through this together. We will find the best doctor in Austin. We will prepare everything carefully, and we will figure it out as we go. That is what we always do." The pregnancy was not easy. Lillian suffered from severe morning sickness for the first 4 months, and she found the Texas heat oppressive as her belly grew. But Vince was constantly at her side, patient and caring, bringing her cool water and reading to her when she was too tired to do anything else. Lillian continued writing throughout her pregnancy, though she had to adjust her work to accommodate her changing body. The readers of the Austin Daily Statesman were fascinated by her honest accounts of frontier life, and her articles had become quite popular. In March of 1879, on a cool spring morning, Lillian gave birth to a son. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when both she and the doctor feared the worst. But Lillian was strong and determined, and with Vince holding her hand and encouraging her through every contraction, she brought their baby into the world. They named him James, after Lillian's father. He was a healthy baby with a strong set of lungs and his father's green eyes. Vince was utterly besotted from the first moment he held his son, tears streaming down his face as he looked at the tiny life they had created together. "He is perfect," Vince whispered, carefully placing James in Lillian's exhausted arms. "You are amazing. I love you so much." "I love you too," Lillian said, gazing down at their son. "He is really ours, our family." Motherhood suited Lillian in ways she had not expected. She loved discovering the rhythms of caring for James, loved watching him grow and change every day. She asked the doctor dozens of questions about infant care, read every book she could find on child development, and kept detailed notes about James's progress. Vince teased her gently about it. "You know you do not have to document his every hiccup, right?" "But what if the pattern of hiccups indicates something important?" Lillian protested, and they both laughed. Lillian continued her writing, now adding articles about motherhood to her repertoire. She wrote honestly about the challenges and joys of raising a child on a working ranch, and her readers responded enthusiastically. When James was 6 months old, Vince's sister Margaret finally made the trip from San Antonio to meet her nephew and sister-in-law. Margaret was a warm, practical woman in her early 30s, and she and Lillian became immediate friends. "I was worried Vince would never find someone," Margaret confessed one afternoon as they sat on the porch watching Vince play with James. "He is so particular about everything." "But you are perfect for him." "He is perfect for me," Lillian said. "He loves me exactly as I am. Do you know how rare that is?" "I do," Margaret said. "My William is the same way. It is a gift to find someone who does not want to change you." She smiled at Lillian. "And I love that you ask so many questions. Vince told me how everyone used to criticize you for it, but I think it is wonderful. The world needs more curious people." The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. James grew into a bright, curious toddler who asked even more questions than his mother, much to everyone's amusement. When he was 2 years old, Lillian discovered she was pregnant again. Their second child, a daughter they named Caroline, was born in the summer of 1881. She was an easier baby than James had been, placid and sweet-tempered. Vince doted on his daughter, and Lillian often found him holding her and telling her stories about the ranch, even though she was far too young to understand. "She likes the sound of your voice," Lillian said, watching them together. "I like talking to her," Vince said. "I am going to make sure she knows she can ask as many questions as she wants, that her curiosity is something to be proud of, just like her mother's." Lillian's writing career continued to flourish. She had published enough articles that a publisher in New York had approached her about compiling them into a book. The idea thrilled her, and she worked on the project in the evenings after the children were asleep, with Vince reading over her drafts and offering suggestions. "This is really good, Lillian," he said one night, setting down a stack of pages. "People need to read this. You are giving an honest account of Western life that is not romanticized or sensationalized. It is real." "Do you think people will actually want to read it?" Lillian asked, feeling suddenly nervous. "I know they will," Vince said firmly. "You have a gift for making people care about what you care about. Your curiosity is contagious." The book, titled Questions from the Frontier, A Woman's View of Ranch Life, was published in the fall of 1882 to surprising acclaim. Lillian's honest, questioning approach to describing life in Texas resonated with readers across the country. She received letters from women who said her work had inspired them to pursue their own interests and ask their own questions. One letter particularly moved her. It was from a young woman in Boston who wrote, "I have always been told I ask too many questions. Reading your book made me realize that my curiosity is not a flaw, but a strength. Thank you for showing me that it is possible to be fully yourself and still find happiness and success." Lillian showed the letter to Vince with tears in her eyes. "This is what I always hoped for," she said. "To make a difference, to help other women see that they do not have to diminish themselves." "You have done that and more," Vince said, holding her close. "I am so proud of you." As their children grew, Lillian and Vince made sure to foster their curiosity. James was fascinated by animals and could spend hours watching the cattle and horses, asking detailed questions about their behavior and care. Caroline loved stories and learning about different places, constantly begging her parents to tell her about the world beyond their ranch. "She gets that from you," Vince told Lillian. "That hunger to know everything." "And James gets his determination from you," Lillian replied. "He is just like you were at that age, I bet." Life was not without its challenges. There were years when drought threatened their herd, times when cattle prices dropped and money was tight, moments when Lillian struggled to balance her writing with motherhood and ranch responsibilities. But through it all, she and Vince faced everything together, their partnership as strong as it had been from that first morning in the stockyards. In 1884, when James was 5 and Caroline was 3, Lillian became pregnant with their third child. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two, and the doctor ordered her to rest as much as possible. Vince hired extra help for the ranch and for the house, determined that Lillian would not overwork herself. "I feel useless just lying here," Lillian complained one afternoon from the sofa where Vince had insisted she rest. "You are growing our child," Vince said, sitting beside her and taking her hand. "That is the opposite of useless. Besides, you are still writing. I see those notebooks piling up." "I cannot help it," Lillian admitted. "I have too many thoughts to just lie here quietly. I have been working on a new article about how the West is changing, how railroads and telegraph lines are connecting us to the rest of the country." "That sounds fascinating," Vince said. "Will you read it to me?" Their third child, another son they named Daniel, was born in January of 1885. The birth was difficult, and afterward the doctor told them that Lillian should not have any more children. It was a bittersweet moment, holding their newborn son and knowing he would be their last baby. 3 is a good number, Vince said softly, as they looked at Daniel sleeping peacefully in his cradle. 3 healthy children and a wife I love more with every passing day. I am a blessed man. I am blessed too, Lillian said, leaning against him. I never imagined my life could be this full, this happy. When I was that lonely girl in Fort Smith, asking questions everyone found annoying, I could not have dreamed of all this. Your questions brought us together, Vince reminded her. If you had not been investigating those robberies, if you had not been curious enough to go to the stockyards that day, we might never have met. Then I am grateful for every question I ever asked, Lillian said. As the years passed, their ranch prospered. Vince expanded the operation carefully, buying more land and increasing their herd. Thomas, the young man they had hired years ago, had become Vince's business partner, managing much of the day-to-day operations and allowing Vince more time with his family. Lillian's writing career also continued to grow. She published 2 more books, both successful, and became a regular contributor to several national magazines. She wrote about everything from ranch life to women's rights to the changing face of the American West. Her work was respected for its intelligence and her trademark curious approach to every subject. She never forgot what it felt like to be dismissed and belittled for her questions. When letters arrived from young women seeking advice or encouragement, she always responded personally, encouraging them to pursue their curiosity and never apologize for their intelligence. James grew into a thoughtful young man who wanted to study veterinary medicine. Caroline developed a passion for teaching and dreamed of starting a school. Daniel, the baby, showed an early aptitude for mathematics and business that suggested he might one day take over the ranch operations. How did we manage to raise such remarkable children? Vince asked one evening in 1895 as they watched their teenagers help with the evening chores. We let them ask questions, Lillian said simply. We never told them their curiosity was wrong or that they should be less than what they are. We gave them what I always wanted, permission to be themselves. You are a wise woman, Lillian Zeller, Vince said, pulling her close. And you are a patient man, Vincent Zeller, she replied, smiling up at him. 17 years of marriage and you still have not grown tired of my questions. Never, he said firmly. Ask me anything. Ask me 1,000 questions. I will spend the rest of my life answering them and still count myself the luckiest man alive. As Lillian looked around at the life they had built together, at the home full of love and curiosity and possibility, she felt profound gratitude. She had been told her whole life that she asked too many questions, that her curious mind was a flaw rather than a gift. But Vince had seen the truth from the very beginning. He had loved her not despite her questions, but because of them. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1899, Vince surprised Lillian with a trip to San Antonio. Margaret and her husband hosted them for a week, taking care of the ranch and the children, and Lillian and Vince had time to themselves for the first time in years. They stayed in a beautiful hotel, ate at fine restaurants, and spent hours walking through the city talking about everything and nothing. On their last evening, Vince took her to a jewelry store and bought her a necklace with a small compass pendant. So you always know you are exactly where you belong, he said as he fastened it around her neck. I do not need a compass for that, Lillian said, her eyes bright with tears. I am always exactly where I belong when I am with you. They danced that night in the hotel ballroom, swaying to music played by a small orchestra. Lillian rested her head on Vince's shoulder and thought about the girl she had been in Fort Smith, frustrated and dismissed, certain she would never find her place in the world. What are you thinking about? Vince asked softly. Just about how far we have come, Lillian said. About how you changed my life that day in the stockyards. You changed mine too, Vince said. You taught me that the best partner is someone who challenges you, who makes you think, who never stops being curious about the world. Every day with you is an adventure. Even the quiet days, Lillian asked with a smile. Especially those, Vince said. Because even on the quietest days, you find something to wonder about, something to question. You keep life interesting. As they danced, Lillian thought about all the questions that had led her to this moment. Why were the cattle being stolen? Who was behind the robberies? What if she worked with the handsome cowboy? What if she took a chance on love? What if she left Fort Smith? What if she followed her heart? Every question had been a stepping stone leading her to this life, to this man, to this deep and abiding happiness. Her curious mind had not been a curse after all. It had been the greatest gift, leading her straight into the arms of a man who cherished it. When they returned to the ranch, they were greeted by their children running out to meet them, all talking at once about everything that had happened while they were gone. James had helped deliver a calf. Caroline had finished reading all the books in the house and needed more. Daniel had calculated that they would need to expand the western pasture next year to accommodate the growing herd. Lillian laughed and tried to answer all their questions, and Vince stood beside her with his arm around her waist, looking at their family with evident pride and love. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Lillian and Vince returned to their favorite spot on the porch. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the night air was filled with the sound of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. "Do you ever wonder what our lives would have been like if we had not met?" Lillian asked. "Sometimes," Vince admitted. "And then I stop wondering because I cannot imagine any life but this one. You and me and our children and this ranch, it all feels inevitable. Like every choice I ever made was leading me to you." "I feel the same way," Lillian said. "Even the hard parts, even being told I was too much or too curious, it all led me here. I would not change any of it." "What are you working on now?" Vince asked. "I saw new notebooks on your desk." "A new book," Lillian said, her voice excited. "About the changing role of women in the West. I want to interview women across Texas, hear their stories, document how they are shaping this place. There is so much happening, Vince. Women are becoming doctors and lawyers and business owners. The world is changing and I want to capture it." "That sounds perfect," Vince said. "When do you start?" "Next week. I have already arranged interviews in Austin and San Antonio. Margaret is going to help me connect with women there." She looked at him. "You do not mind me traveling?" "Lillian, I would never stand in the way of your work," Vince said. "Your writing matters. The questions you ask and the stories you tell, they are changing how people think about the West and about women's capabilities. I am proud to support that." "Thank you," she said softly. "For always believing in me." "Always," he promised. The new book took Lillian 2 years to complete. She traveled extensively throughout Texas, meeting remarkable women and documenting their stories. Vince supported her fully, managing the ranch and the children during her trips, never once complaining about the extra burden. When Women of the West, Voices from the Frontier was published in 1901, it became Lillian's most successful book yet. The personal stories of female ranchers, doctors, teachers, and entrepreneurs resonated with readers across the country. Lillian received invitations to speak at universities and women's clubs, sharing her work and encouraging other women to pursue their ambitions. One speaking engagement took her back to Fort Smith in the spring of 1902. She had not been back since leaving with Vince 23 years earlier, and she was curious to see how the town had changed. Vince came with her and they stood together on the street where they had first met at the stockyards. Much had changed. New buildings had gone up, The streets were wider and busier, but the essential character of the place remained the same. "I was so lost here," Lillian said quietly. "So sure I would never find my place in the world. And now you are returning as a celebrated author and journalist," Vince said. "I bet Editor Thornton is regretting how he treated you." They found out later that Thornton had retired years ago, but the current editor of the Fort Smith Gazette invited Lillian to speak at the newspaper office. She stood in the same cramped room where she had once been relegated to writing recipes and social columns, and she told the young reporters assembled there about the importance of asking questions. "I was told my whole life that I asked too many questions," she said. "That my curiosity was unbecoming, that I should learn to be quiet and accept what I was told. But questions are how we find truth. Curiosity is how we grow and learn and change the world. Never let anyone make you ashamed of wanting to know more." After her speech, a young woman approached her nervously. She could not have been more than 20, with ink stains on her fingers and a determined set to her jaw. "Miss Sinclair, I mean Mrs. Zeller, I just wanted to say thank you. I have been reading your work for years, and it inspired me to become a journalist. But the editors here keep telling me I ask too many questions." Lillian smiled and took the young woman's hand. "Then you are asking exactly the right amount of questions. Keep asking them. Eventually, you will find people who appreciate your curious mind. I promise you that." As they left Fort Smith to return to Texas, Vince took Lillian's hand. "You made a difference to that girl today. You probably made a difference to everyone who heard you speak." "I hope so," Lillian said. "I just want other women to know that they do not have to diminish themselves to be loved or respected. That being curious and asking questions is not a flaw." "You have certainly proven that," Vince said. "You are living proof that a woman can have it all, a career she loves, a family that adores her, and a husband who thinks she hung the moon." "You really think I hung the moon?" Lillian teased. "Absolutely," Vince said seriously. "You are the most remarkable person I have ever known, Lillian. Every day I wake up grateful that you walked into those stockyards asking questions all those years ago." By 1905, all three of their children were pursuing their own dreams. James had graduated from veterinary school and was establishing a practice in Austin. Caroline was teaching at a school for girls in San Antonio, and Daniel was working alongside Thomas to expand the ranch operations. Lillian was working on her 5th book, this one a memoir about her life and career. She wrote about growing up in Fort Smith, about meeting Vince, about building their life together in Texas. She wrote honestly about the challenges she had faced as a woman trying to be taken seriously in a man's world, and about the man who had always believed in her potential. Vince read the manuscript in draft form, and when he finished, there were tears in his eyes. "You made me sound like a hero," he said. "You are my hero," Lillian said simply. "You saw me when everyone else wanted me to be invisible. You loved my curious mind when everyone else wanted me to be quiet. That makes you a hero in my book." "I just loved you," Vince said. "That was the easiest thing I have ever done." The memoir, Questions That Led Me Home, was published in 1906 to widespread acclaim. It became a bestseller, and Lillian found herself in demand for speaking engagements across the country. But she always made sure to return home to the ranch, to Vince, to the life they had built together. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1909, the whole family gathered at the ranch. James came from Austin with his new wife, a fellow veterinarian named Ruth. Caroline brought her husband, a teacher she had met in San Antonio, and their infant daughter. Daniel and Thomas were both there, now full partners in the successful ranch operation they had built. They had a big dinner on the porch, with a table stretched out to accommodate everyone. As Lillian looked around at all the faces she loved, at the life that had grown from that first meeting in the stockyards 30 years ago, she felt overwhelming gratitude. "I would like to propose a toast," Vince said, standing and raising his glass. "To my wife, Lillian. 30 years ago, she walked into my life asking questions, and she has not stopped asking them since. She has made me a better man, given me 3 incredible children, and shown the world what a woman with a curious mind can accomplish. I love you more today than I did 30 years ago, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." "To Lillian," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Lillian stood, her own eyes damp with tears. "And to Vince," she said, "who taught me that the right person does not want you to be less than you are, he wants you to be more. Who showed me that love means supporting each other's dreams, not limiting them. Who has spent 3 decades answering my endless questions with patience and love. You are everything I never knew I needed." As the evening wore on and the stars came out overhead, Lillian found herself sitting alone with Vince on the porch swing they had installed years ago. The rest of the family was inside, talking and laughing, but Lillian and Vince had slipped away for a quiet moment together. "You remember our first kiss?" Lillian asked. "After Marshall Reeves rescued us from those rustlers." "I remember everything about that day," Vince said. "I remember being terrified I was going to lose you before I had a chance to tell you how I felt. And I remember the overwhelming relief when you said you would come to Texas with me." "Best decision I ever made," Lillian said, snuggling closer to him. "What questions are running through your mind right now?" Vince asked, knowing her well enough to recognize when her thoughts were racing. "I am wondering how it is possible to be this happy," Lillian admitted. "I am wondering if our grandchildren will grow up to ask as many questions as we do. I am wondering what we will be doing 10 years from now, 20 years from now. I am wondering if there is any story better than ours." "I do not think there is," Vince said softly. "But if there is, I am sure you will find it and write about it." He kissed her temple gently. "Keep asking your questions, Lillian. Never stop being curious. Never stop wondering. It is who you are, and it is one of the 1,000 reasons I love you." They sat together in comfortable silence, the swing creaking gently, the sounds of their family drifting out from the house. Lillian thought about the long road that had brought her here, all the questions she had asked, all the obstacles she had overcome. She thought about the girl she had been in Fort Smith, dismissed and belittled, told she was too much and not enough all at once. She thought about the terror and excitement of leaving everything she knew to follow her heart to Texas. She thought about building a life and a career on her own terms, with a partner who supported every dream she had ever dared to dream. And she thought about the countless women who had read her work and written to her, telling her that she had inspired them to pursue their own curiosity, to ask their own questions, to demand to be heard and respected. That legacy felt more valuable than any award or accolade. "Are you happy?" Vince asked, as if reading her thoughts. "I am more than happy," Lillian said. "I am fulfilled. I am loved. I am exactly who I was meant to be, and that is all because you loved my curious mind instead of trying to silence it." "Always," Vince promised. "Until my last breath, I will love every question you ask, every thought in that brilliant mind of yours. You are extraordinary, Lillian Zeller." As they watched their family through the window, their children and grandchildren gathered together in the home they had built with love and determination, Lillian knew that her story had come full circle. She had been told she asked too many questions, but those questions had led her to love, to purpose, to a life richer than she could have imagined. And the cowboy who had loved her curious mind had given her the greatest gift possible, the freedom to be completely, unapologetically herself. That was the truest definition of love she had ever found. Years continued to pass in happiness and contentment. Lillian and Vince grew older together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing season. Lillian published 2 more books and continued writing articles until she was well into her 60s, finally retiring only when her eyesight began to fail. Even then, she did not stop asking questions. She would sit on the porch with Vince, now both of them in their 70s, and pepper him with questions about the ranch operations, about Daniel's new expansion plans, about their growing number of grandchildren. "You think James's oldest boy will become a veterinarian like his father?" she would ask. "Why do you think Caroline's daughter wants to study law? What made Daniel decide to invest in that new breed of cattle? How many great-grandchildren do we have now? Is it 15 or 16? And Vince, his hair now silver but his green eyes still bright with love, would answer every question patiently, treasuring each one because they meant Lillian was still fully herself, still endlessly curious about the world around her. On a warm spring evening in 1920, as they celebrated 51 years of marriage, their entire family gathered once again at the ranch. Children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren filled the house and spilled out onto the porch and lawn. The ranch that Vince had built and that Lillian had helped make into a true home was now a legacy spanning 4 generations. As the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Lillian stood beside Vince and surveyed the gathering with wonder. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked him. "That first day when I showed up at the stockyards asking about cattle robberies, did you imagine it would lead to all this?" "I imagined wanting to know everything about you," Vince said honestly. "I imagined wanting to spend every day hearing your questions and watching your brilliant mind work. But this," he gestured at their assembled family, "this is more beautiful than anything I could have imagined." Their oldest grandson, James's son, who had indeed become a veterinarian like his father, raised his glass. "To Grandma Lillian and Grandpa Vince. Thank you for showing us all what true partnership looks like. Thank you for teaching us that questions are valuable, that curiosity is a gift, and that love means supporting each other's dreams. You have built something remarkable here, and we are all blessed to be part of it." As everyone echoed the toast, Lillian felt Vince's hand find hers, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. 51 years, and his touch still made her heart flutter. 51 years, and she still had questions she wanted to ask him, things she wanted to know. "I love you," she whispered to him just for him to hear. "I love you too," he whispered back. "My curious, brilliant, extraordinary wife, thank you for asking all those questions that day. Thank you for being brave enough to follow where they led. Thank you for answering them," Lillian said. "And for loving me exactly as I am." As the celebration continued around them, Lillian and Vince stood together hand in hand, 2 people who had found in each other the perfect complement. She had asked the questions, and he had loved her for it. Together, they had built a life that proved beyond any doubt that curiosity, intelligence, and love could coexist beautifully. The cowboy had loved her curious mind, and that love had transformed both of their lives into something wonderful. It was the kind of love story that deserved to be told, to be remembered, to inspire others to embrace who they truly are and to seek partners who cherish rather than diminish them. And on that warm spring evening, surrounded by the legacy of their love, Lillian Sinclair Zeller knew that every question she had ever asked had been worth it. Because they had all led her here, to this moment, to this man, to this extraordinary life. It was, she thought with deep satisfaction, the perfect answer to the most important question she had ever asked herself. What does true happiness look like? It looked exactly like this.